Catherine had built her life on one principle: family loyalty above all else. 28 years of marriage, 3 kids, a reputation in her community as the steady one, the reliable one, the woman who held everything together. By all accounts, she had achieved the American dream: security, stability, a husband who provided, children who turned out well, a home in one of Connecticut's most prestigious neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone and everyone was careful about what they admitted. But one evening, on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday night, that entire identity collapsed with a single sentence from her daughter. The words were quiet, almost clinical, delivered in a way that suggested they'd been rehearsed 100 times. But they shattered everything Catherine thought she knew. Her daughter said, "He did things to me when I was 14. And in that moment, Catherine faced an impossible choice that would define the rest of her life. Protect the family she'd spent decades building, maintain the image she'd worked so hard to create, preserve the marriage that was her entire identity, or protect the person she loved most, the person whose truth was finally being spoken, the person whose safety had been sacrificed on the altar of family loyalty. What happened next would expose not just one crime, but a pattern of lies spanning decades. It would tear apart 2 families. It would challenge everything her other children believed. It would force every person in that house to choose between the family they thought they had and the truth about the family they actually were. And it would raise questions that none of them were prepared to answer. Catherine would have to ask herself if she was a villain or a victim. Her other children would have to grapple with whether they could trust anyone. And society would have to confront uncomfortable truths about how predators hide in plain sight, how families enable abuse without even realizing it, and what happens when loyalty becomes betrayal. By the end of this story, you'll have to answer that question yourself. Who is your real family? Is it the people you've built a life with, the people you've chosen to trust, the people whose approval has shaped every decision you've made? Or is it the people who tell you the truth, even when that truth costs everything? Trust me, it won't be an easy answer. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is Catherine. For 28 years, she was known as Mrs. Robert Harrison, married to a successful businessman, mother of 3, pillar of her community in suburban Connecticut. By all measures, she had achieved everything a woman of her generation was supposed to achieve: security, stability, a husband who provided, children who turned out well. She had mastered the role of the supportive wife, the woman who managed everything at home so her husband could focus on his career. She had built an identity around being indispensable to her family, the person everyone depended on, the person who held everything together no matter what. But beneath that carefully constructed surface was a man she didn't actually know: Robert Harrison, 52 years her senior when they met, real estate developer, philanthropist, grandfather, a man with a commanding presence, a man who seemed to have everything figured out, a man who appeared to be exactly what Catherine needed. But he was also a predator. The kind of predator who operates in plain sight, who hides behind respectability, who uses his position and his charm to manipulate everyone around him. And this raises 3 core questions that will define everything you're about to hear. Question 1. How does a woman married to someone for nearly 30 years miss something so fundamental? How does she not see the patterns, not notice the signs, not understand what's happening right in front of her? The answer is not that she missed it. The answer is that she refused to see it. She had trained herself over decades not to see, because seeing would require her to act, and acting would destroy the only life she knew. Question 2. What makes a 22-year-old woman finally break nearly 20 years of silence? What gives her the courage to speak when she's been conditioned to stay quiet, to protect the family, to prioritize loyalty over safety? The answer: therapy, education, physical distance from the person who hurt her, and the realization that protecting him meant sacrificing herself. Question 3. What does a woman do when she has to choose between her marriage and her daughter's trauma? When loyalty to a spouse and protection of a child cannot coexist, which does she choose? The answer: She burns it all down. But the aftermath will be far messier than she ever imagined. It will tear her family apart. It will destroy her financial security. It will force her to rebuild her entire life from nothing. And it will reveal that the family she thought she was protecting was never really a family at all. Catherine was born in 1960. By the time she was 35, she'd already made the calculations that many women of her generation made. She'd left her career as a marketing manager when her first child was born. She'd convinced herself it was a choice, not a sacrifice. She'd learned to find her identity not in her work, not in her own accomplishments, but in being a wife and mother, in managing a household, in being the person everyone depended on. She was very good at this role. Too good, perhaps. She had learned early that her value came from what she did for others, not from who she was. She had learned that being a good woman meant being a small woman, that success meant making yourself disappear into the needs of your family. By the time Robert came into her life, she was 32 years old and ready to be rescued. He was 50, twice divorced, financially successful, and charming in the way men of his generation often were. Commanding, decisive, clear about what he wanted, and what he wanted was her. She thought this meant he would take care of her. What she didn't understand was that taking care of her meant controlling her. It happened so gradually that she never noticed the moment she became smaller. By 1995, 5 years into the marriage, Catherine had learned an entire set of unwritten rules. Don't mention your job anymore. He preferred wives who didn't work. Don't spend money without asking permission. It was his money after all, he made it, so he controlled it. Don't have opinions that contradicted his. Disagreement was disrespectful. Don't maintain close friendships. They were a distraction. And certainly don't question him about anything. Because questioning meant you didn't trust him, and not trusting meant you didn't love him. He would remind her of this regularly, in small ways and large ways. The way he would correct her in front of friends. The way he would check her credit card statements. The way he would decide where they would vacation, what she would wear, who she would spend time with. None of it was dramatic. None of it was the kind of abuse that shows up in movies or on television. It was the mundane, everyday kind of control that gets normalized so gradually you don't even realize you're being controlled. It was the kind of abuse that makes you doubt your own perceptions, your own needs, your own right to have an independent thought. On the surface, the Harrison family appeared to be everything. Robert's business was thriving. They'd built a 6,000-square-foot home in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and everyone was careful about what they admitted to knowing. Catherine had mastered the role of philanthropic wife. She sat on board. She organized galas. She was in the junior league. She was everything a certain kind of American wife was supposed to be. Their children were smart, well-mannered, and successful in school. From the outside, they were a template for the American dream. Everything was perfect. Everything looked right. But inside that house, something else was happening. Something Catherine couldn't quite name or address. A tension. An unspoken rule. A sense that everything depended on maintaining the facade, on keeping up appearances, on never letting anyone see what was really happening behind closed doors. Catherine had learned to read Robert's moods like a weather system. When he was pleased, the house breathed. When he was displeased, and he was often displeased, the entire family learned to be very small and very quiet. The children learned not to laugh too loud. They learned not to ask for things. They learned not to have needs that inconvenienced him. And Catherine learned to manage everyone's behavior, to anticipate problems before they happened, to prevent any situation that might upset him. Emma was born in 1993. She was Robert's stepdaughter, the biological child from Catherine's first marriage, but Robert had adopted her as a baby. By all accounts, he was a devoted stepfather. He attended her school events. He helped with homework. He coached her soccer team. He was present, too present. When Emma was 14 years old, Robert began crossing lines that should never be crossed. What happened between Robert and Emma was not a single incident. It was a pattern. Carefully groomed, strategically hidden. It was inappropriate touching that escalated over 3 years. It was him entering her room at night. It was him convincing her that this was normal, that this was love, that if she told anyone she would destroy the family and it would be her fault. And crucially, she believed him. He had been teaching her this her entire life, teaching her that loyalty to the family came before her own safety, before her own body, before her own right to say no. Catherine had no idea what was happening, or perhaps more accurately, she had every idea but had trained herself not to see, because seeing would require action, and action would require destroying the only life she knew. By the time Emma was 17, the signs were everywhere. She no longer participated in family dinners. She spent hours in her room with the door locked. She had changed from a bright, outgoing child to someone withdrawn and careful. She flinched when Robert came near her. She was terrified of him, and Catherine saw all of this, but she did what she'd been trained to do her entire marriage. She accommodated it. She made excuses for Emma's withdrawal, teenage angst. She stressed about school. She made excuses for Robert's behavior. He's just concerned about her. He wants to help. She made excuses for the tension. Every family has conflict. She did anything, everything to avoid the obvious truth. In September 2015, Emma left for college. For the first time in her life, she was physically separated from Robert. What she didn't realize was that this distance would become the thing that finally allowed her to see clearly. Because it's very hard to question abuse when you're still in the environment where it's happening. Abuse is like water. You don't notice it when you're drowning in it. You only notice when someone pulls you out. At college, Emma experienced something she'd never known: safety. Autonomy, people who asked her opinions and valued them. She made friends. She joined clubs. She started to become herself, the self that had been suppressed for so long, the self that was afraid to take up space in her own house. And in that space of freedom, she also started to understand something critical. What had happened to her wasn't normal. It wasn't love. It was abuse. In her sophomore year, Emma took a psychology course on trauma. She was reading about grooming, about manipulation, about the tactics that predators use to isolate their victims, normalize the abuse, and enforce secrecy. And she kept thinking, this is exactly what happened to me. That's exactly what he did. That's exactly how I responded. For the first time, she had language for what had been done to her. For the first time, she understood that it wasn't her fault. For the first time, she was angry. Over the next 2 years, Emma processed her trauma in therapy. She documented what happened. She clarified her memories. She understood the patterns. She built the courage to tell someone. The question was, who? Emma knew that telling anyone would change everything. If she told her siblings first, they might pressure her to keep it quiet to protect the family. If she told her father, he would deny it, gaslight her, frame her as unstable or revenge-seeking. If she told the authorities immediately, it would become legal, forensic, clinical. She would lose control of her own story. So she decided to tell Catherine first, her mother, the woman who had been in the house, who should have protected her, who either knew and did nothing or didn't know because she chose not to see. Catherine would be the test. Would her mother believe her? Would her mother protect her? Or would her mother protect her husband instead? They met in Catherine's home office, just the two of them. Emma had rehearsed this conversation 100 times. She knew what she wanted to say. She knew how she wanted to say it. But when the moment came, all she could do was begin. She said, "Mom, when I was 14, Dad started doing things to me. Sexual things." And then Emma told her everything. She told her about the first time. She told her about the pattern. She told her about the shame and the fear and the silence. She told her about why she hadn't said anything, because he had convinced her that it was her fault, that she'd seduced him, that she had to protect the family. She told her that she'd spent 2 years in therapy understanding that none of that was true. And then Catherine said something that would determine the rest of her life. "I believe you, completely, and I'm going to help you. Whatever happens next, you're not alone." That moment, that choice to believe her daughter, was the moment Catherine's marriage ended, though it would take several months for everyone to understand it. At that moment, Catherine made a choice that would destroy her marriage, her financial security, her relationship with some of her other children, and the life she had built for 28 years. But it was the only choice she could make and still be a mother. It was the only choice she could make and still be a human being. And it was the beginning of a story that would unravel everything, that would force her to confront who she really was, That would ask her to choose between loyalty and truth. And that would ultimately require her to become a different person than she had ever imagined she would be. That weekend, Catherine made a phone call she knew would be catastrophic for everything she'd built. She called the police. She told them that her daughter had disclosed sexual abuse by her husband. She gave them Emma's information. She explained the timeline. She told them that she wanted to press charges. And then she said something else. I want to know if there are other victims. That question, are there other victims, would prove to be the thread that unraveled everything. The investigation into Robert Harrison would reveal a pattern of behavior that predated his marriage to Catherine by decades. The detectives began by interviewing Emma in detail, getting her statement and building the timeline. They reviewed family photographs. They examined social media. They looked at financial records to see if there were payments to silence anyone, if there were secrets being bought. And then they did something crucial. They began interviewing other people who had been around Robert over the years, former employees, neighbors, friends. What they discovered was chilling. A woman who had worked for him in the 1980s who had experienced harassment. A babysitter from 1995 who had felt uncomfortable around him. Another person with a childhood connection to the family who reported concerning behavior. None of these had resulted in formal charges at the time, but together they formed a pattern. A pattern of Robert Harrison targeting young, vulnerable people in his proximity and manipulating them. When word got out that Robert Harrison had been accused of sexual abuse, the media descended. The narrative that emerged was initially confused. Some outlets focused on Robert. A prominent businessman faces charges. Others focused on Catherine. The wife turns in husband to the police. But there was a third narrative building underneath, and it came from Robert's defense team. They said, "This is a vindictive ex-stepdaughter seeking revenge. The victim has been influenced by her mother against Mr. Harrison. There's no credible evidence. This is a false accusation. Robert Harrison hired the best defense attorney Connecticut money could buy, and that attorney did what defense attorneys do. He created doubt. He suggested that Emma had been manipulated. He suggested that Catherine had always resented Robert's success. He suggested that this was a financial move, that Catherine wanted the divorce and wanted to destroy him in the process. He painted a picture that resonated with a lot of people. A scorned woman and a vulnerable teenager being used to take down a successful man. And for a moment it worked. Public opinion was divided. Some people believed Emma. Some people believed Robert. And some people, perhaps most people, were in the middle, unsure. This is what happens when a crime is invisible for years, when it happens in the privacy of a home. When the only two witnesses to key moments are the perpetrator and the victim, the truth becomes a matter of credibility, and credibility, unfortunately, often comes down to who tells the better story. But then the detectives found something. While they were reviewing Robert's phone records and email accounts, they discovered something alarming. There were hundreds of photographs, hidden folders on his computer, photographs that constituted additional evidence of his pattern of behavior toward Emma, photographs that were deeply inappropriate and that clearly documented grooming behavior. When Emma was shown some of this evidence, she broke down. Because she suddenly understood that her memories, which she'd questioned and second-guessed, were confirmed by documentation. She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't exaggerated it. It was all real, and it was all provable. At the same time the detectives were deepening their investigation into Robert's actions toward Emma, they were also following another thread. Catherine's question about other victims. As detectives looked deeper into Robert's past, they began to uncover a fuller picture of who he really was. Not just a man who had made one terrible mistake. Not just a man who had crossed a line one time. But a man with a consistent pattern. A man who had been doing this for decades. A man who had learned exactly how to target vulnerable people, manipulate them, silence them, and move on to the next victim. Before the formal charges were filed, Catherine confronted Robert. She told him what she knew. She told him that Emma had disclosed. She told him that the police were investigating. And she told him that she was divorcing him. His reaction was immediate and severe. "This is insane," he said. "Emma is lying. She's making this up. You're destroying our family over the word of a troubled girl." And Catherine, for the first time in 28 years, didn't accommodate him. She didn't make excuses for him. She didn't try to see his perspective. She didn't try to find a way to hold the family together. She said, "I don't believe you. I believe her. And I'm done." That moment, when Catherine chose her daughter over her marriage, was the moment Robert lost the person who had been enabling him to operate in secret. Catherine's silence had given him cover. Catherine's denial had given him protection. Catherine's willingness to not see was the foundation of his ability to hide. And the moment she stopped protecting him, everything changed. Robert Harrison was formally arrested and charged with 2 counts of sexual abuse of a minor, endangering the welfare of a child, and additional charges related to the photographs found on his computer. The defense strategy was clear from the beginning: dispute the accounts, create doubt, paint Catherine as the villain orchestrating revenge. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutors had 3 main pieces of evidence. First, Emma's testimony. Her account was detailed, specific, and consistent with research on how trauma survivors remember abuse. Trauma memory isn't perfect, but it's consistent. Second, the photographs found on Robert's computer. These weren't images of Emma, but they were images that showed a pattern of Robert saving and categorizing inappropriate material. The timestamps on these files aligned with Emma's account of when the abuse was happening. The metadata told a story. Third, the corroborating witnesses. While other victims didn't come forward with their own abuse claims, they did provide testimony about Robert's inappropriate behavior toward them. This established that Robert had a pattern. He wasn't a man who had one lapse. He was a man with a consistent approach to predatory behavior. When Emma took the stand, she had to recount the abuse in detail. This is the brutal part of seeking justice. The victim has to re-traumatize themselves publicly. They have to be questioned aggressively by a defense attorney whose job is to discredit them. They have to sit in a room with their abuser and relive the worst moments of their life. And they have to do it all while strangers judge whether they're believable. Emma was cross-examined for 2 days. The defense attorney tried every tactic. "Isn't it true you were angry at your stepfather for being strict? Isn't it true you were seeking attention? Isn't it possible you're misremembering events from 20 years ago?" Emma answered every question with clarity and honesty. And when asked about the discrepancies the defense was trying to create, she said something that would become the crux of the case. "I may not remember the exact dates or times. I may not remember what I was wearing or all the details, but I remember how it felt. I remember the fear. I remember the shame. I remember exactly what happened to my body and exactly who did it, and no cross-examination is going to make me doubt that." After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 4 days. The verdict, when it came, was clear: guilty on all counts. Robert Harrison was convicted of sexually abusing his stepdaughter. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. He would be 79 years old before he could apply for parole. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. But this is where the real complication begins. Because legal justice doesn't heal families. It doesn't restore relationships. It doesn't answer the bigger questions. What happens to the family now? What happens to Catherine's other children? What happens to the man Robert was before he was convicted? Were there really no signs? Or were there signs everyone chose not to see? The conviction didn't bring the family together. It fractured them. Catherine's oldest son, Michael, couldn't accept what his stepfather had done, not because he didn't believe the evidence. The evidence was overwhelming, but because accepting it meant accepting that his mother had been married to a predator, that she had been living with a predator, that she had somehow not known or not acted sooner, and that threatened his entire sense of identity. Michael had loved Robert. Robert had been the father figure that his biological father wasn't. Robert had taught him things. Robert had supported his career. And suddenly all of that felt tainted. Michael said, "I loved my stepfather. He was present when my biological father wasn't. He coached me. He helped me." And learning that he did these things, to Emma especially, it made me feel like I couldn't trust anyone. Not my stepfather. Not my mother for not stopping it sooner. Not even myself, because I didn't see it. Catherine's second child, Sarah, had a different response. She was enraged at her mother, not at Robert, at Catherine. Sarah said, "I blamed my mother for not protecting Emma. I blamed her for being married to a monster. I blamed her for creating the circumstances that allowed this to happen. I know logically that victims of abuse sometimes can't see abuse. But emotionally, I was furious with her. It took years of therapy for me to understand that my mother was also a victim of manipulation. And Emma was dealing with something else entirely, survival guilt. She had spoken up. She had fought for justice. She had won her case. But her victory had destroyed her family. Her siblings resented her. Her mother was now financially ruined from legal fees. The family name was now associated with sexual abuse. Emma had told the truth, and the truth had detonated everything. Catherine had an additional reckoning that her children didn't have to face. Did she enable this? By choosing not to see, did she become complicit? By staying silent, did she allow harm to continue? By prioritizing family stability over family safety, did she become responsible for Emma's trauma? Catherine has spent years in therapy asking herself the same question. Am I a victim or a perpetrator? And she thinks the answer is, I'm both. I am a victim of Robert's manipulation and control. But I am also a perpetrator in that my denial and my refusal to see allowed him to continue harming my daughter. I can't get away from that. This is the hardest part of this story to sit with, because the truth is neither simple nor clean. Catherine was not responsible for Robert's actions. Robert is the person who chose to abuse Emma. He is the guilty party. He is a criminal. But Catherine was responsible for her own response to warning signs. And the warning signs were there. Emma withdrew. Emma being afraid. Emma flinches away from Robert. These are not subtle signs. These are emergency signals. And Catherine, whether consciously or unconsciously, chose to interpret them as teenage moodiness, as a normal family conflict, as anything but the truth. There's a question that nobody asked directly, but that hangs over this entire story. If Catherine had seen Emma's distress and intervened sooner, if she had asked the hard questions, if she had pushed back against Robert, if she had prioritized Emma's safety over family stability, how much suffering could have been prevented? We can't answer that question. We can't rewrite history. But we can ask for it, and in asking it, we're forced to confront something uncomfortable. The power that women in particular have to enable abuse by choosing not to see it. Catherine wasn't the abuser, but she was the gatekeeper, and she failed to guard the gate. 5 years after Robert Harrison's conviction, things had changed significantly for everyone involved. Emma completed her master's degree in psychology. She now works as a trauma therapist, specifically with survivors of childhood sexual abuse. She channels her trauma into helping others. This is her meaning-making. Catherine divorced Robert. She had to restart her financial life from scratch. She took a job that paid a fraction of what she'd been accustomed to, but she rebuilt. Michael eventually came to terms with his anger. He's in therapy. His relationship with his mother has improved, though there's still distance. Sarah similarly found a path toward reconciliation. She's come to understand that her mother was also betrayed. And Robert Harrison is in prison. He is 75 years old. He has no possibility of parole for another several years. His legacy is defined entirely by what he did. The Harrison family is not a family anymore. They are survivors of a family that was built on lies. So let me ask you directly, who was Catherine's real family? Was it Robert, the man she'd built a life with, the man she'd chosen to trust? Or was it Emma, the person she eventually chose to protect? I think we both know the answer. But the real question is, why did it take Emma breaking her silence for Catherine to finally see? Why do so many families wait for a crisis before they ask the hard questions? Why is it that we can sense something is wrong but choose not to name it? These are the questions this story asks. Not about crime, not about justice, but about family, about loyalty, about the choices we make when loyalty and truth are in conflict. I want to leave you with this. This story isn't unique. There are thousands of families experiencing something similar right now. A child trying to disclose abuse, a parent trying to decide between their marriage and their child's safety, a family trying to navigate the aftermath of truth, and many of them make the choice Catherine almost made, the choice to protect the family image instead of protecting the family members. So I'm asking you directly. If someone in your life came to you with a disclosure like Emma's, what would you do? Would you believe them? Would you act? Or would you find ways to doubt them? Because that moment of believing a difficult truth is when real family begins. Here are the questions I want you to sit with. Question 1. Do you think Catherine bears any responsibility for Emma's trauma? Comment your honest answer below. I want to know what you think. Question 2. At what point did Catherine have the information she needed to intervene? Was it Emma's withdrawal? Was it her fear of Robert? Was it something else? Question 3. If you were in Emma's position, would you have told your mother? Would you have trusted her to believe you? These aren't easy questions, but they're important ones. And your answers in the comments will tell us something about how we, as a society, handle disclosure and accountability. If this story shook you, if it made you think about your own family, if it raised questions you're not sure how to answer, there are more stories like this. Stories of families torn apart by hidden crimes. Stories of choices between loyalty and truth. Stories of people who had to become who they never expected to be. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join me as we explore what really happens when family secrets come to light. The question was, who was Catherine's real family? And the answer was, the person who told the truth. Thanks for watching.